let me bring in Hardeep Singh Puri, Union Minister. Mr. Puri, very good evening to you. I want to ask you, how do you view what is transpired in the Delhi High Court today with respect to the Kejriwal matter? Your opening reactions.
Rahulji, what has transpired in the Delhi High Court is a clear case of the facts being allowed to speak for themselves and the learned High Court taking cognizance of that. This was not a bail application. It was a challenge to the arrest and remand, and it was a challenge under Section 19 of the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, where Mr. Kejriwal's lawyers tried to argue that the arrest violated that section or was not in order, and the judge was unsparing. And I just want to point out the three elements in the judgment which make it absolutely clear as to what we are dealing with. The learned judge said that Mr. Kejriwal was responsible not only in his personal capacity, because he was part of the formulation of the excise policy, and I'll come to that in a minute later. He was also responsible as Chief Minister, because earlier he had suggested that Mr. Ravi Nair did not report to him, but reported instead to Marlene Atishi and to Mr. Bharadwaj. And third, as the convener of the Aam Aadmi Party, he was personally responsible for demanding kickbacks. So there can be no ambiguity about what the learned judge said. And I also want to remind you that this excise policy was formulated as per an order that I have in front of me. It started on September 4th, 2020, when Delhi was reeling under the effect of a once-in-a-lifetime, once-in-a-century pandemic. People were dying. People were looking for oxygen. People needed vaccines. People needed to save their lives. Mr. Kejriwal set up this Delhi excise policy for the year 21-22, and this policy came into being in November 21, and it continued to July 22. It was argued by Mr. Kejriwal's lawyers that Mr. Kejriwal was in fact not responsible personally. He brought in the Money Laundering Act. He brought in the fact that there's an election. The judge was very clear, unambiguous, that the timing has nothing to do. And I want to recall for you, Rahulji, since November 2023, Mr. Kejriwal has received 9 summons. If he was clear after the first or second summons, he should have gone to the Enforcement Directorate or invited them and said, here are the facts. No, he kept evading the summons till on the night of 21 and 22 March, they visited that Aam Aadmi Party's humble abode, the Sheesh Mahal, and arrested him. This was a challenge to the arrest and the remand.
Well, that of course has been very succinctly and sharply clarified by the Delhi High Court that a law cannot differentiate between a chief minister and the Aam Aadmi, and somebody as powerful, etc., the chief minister can't determine when he should be arrested. So we'll just set that aside for a few moments. What the AAP came out and said right after, Sanjay Singh, person who just got bail from the Supreme Court, he came out and said that, look, the two approvers in this case are compromised. They are unreliable because they funded the BJP, and one of their fathers has in fact even got a ticket to contest the BJP election from Andhra Pradesh. Now, he's talking about Magunta Reddy and his son. So, I want to ask you, would this not be an obvious conflict of interest? Two approvers, both sort of funded the BJP electorally.
Thank you very much, Rahulji, for asking this question. Since we are analyzing or discussing what the learned court said, learned judge said, let me quote to you the exact words. And I read out from this thing called, what is this called? The live law.
Yeah.
It says, the court, however, made it clear that approval statements are recorded by the court and not by the probe agency to cast, I quote, to cast aspersions on the manner of recording statements of approver would amount to casting aspersions on the judicial process. The law of approver is more than 100 years old. I emphasize, more than 100 years old. It is not a one-year-old law to suggest as if it was enacted to falsely implicate the petitioner. Then it added, and I quote, "Who gave tickets for contesting elections or who purchases electoral bonds is not the concern of the court." I think it's as clear as daylight. They have tried to introduce this element. They have tried to introduce a diversion, and the learned judge, honorable judge, has come down very clearly saying, A, the arrest and the remand are perfectly in order. It's not a violation of Section 19 of the Prevention of Money Laundering Act. The statements of the approvers have been correctly approved, have been correctly obtained before by the court, and that to question that amounts to casting aspersions on the judiciary itself.
Okay, so Mr. Puri, let me ask you, because you once held the urban development portfolio, so you know that Delhi...
I still hold it.
Yes, you did. And the Union Territory of Delhi, of course, is run by the Chief Minister and the Lieutenant Governor in conjunction. And you are aware of this. So I want to ask you now, do you believe that Mr. Kejriwal, government A, because of the fact that the court has come out and said that, look, Mr. Kejriwal didn't just accept money or what have you in his personal capacity, but also as AAP convener. Has he lost the authority to rule? Has the AAP government itself lost the authority to rule? And therefore, you are going to consider at the central level, perhaps, President's rule?
Rahulji, it's always a pleasure talking to you because you bring in so many sophisticated concepts right in one go. Let me just put it one way. I am the Minister for Housing and Urban Affairs, and Delhi enjoys a very special situation. You have an elected government in Delhi which exercises the sets of powers. You have a Lieutenant Governor, the DDA and all this, and you have a Central Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs which in this tripartite structure has a role to play. Now, as far as I am concerned, I can speak in my capacity as a BJP spokesperson. If you ask me, has Mr. Kejriwal lost his credibility? Has he lost the right to remain Chief Minister? My answer, Rahulji, would be an unambiguous yes. I think by any yardstick, any template of political decency and morality, Mr. Kejriwal should have stepped down by now. So that is one. What the central government will do is not for me as a BJP spokesman. I am not appearing here in my capacity as a union minister. The central government is larger, and I think the central government will take the call whenever it is required to. Today, all I would say is, in my capacity as a BJP pravakta appearing in your show, I would say I think he has forfeited that right. He has lost the credibility, and I think for him to continue to try and govern Delhi, a task which he did not acquit himself with distinction even when he was not behind bars, I think he has lost his credibility, and I think he should step down. But that's my view as a BJP spokesperson. What action the central government is, because you spoke about President's rule, that's above my pay grade. That's something the central government has to address.
Okay, final question. Political one. In case he says that, look, I'm going to resign as Chief Minister, but my wife or someone else from the AAP will continue in my stead, would that be acceptable, Mr. Puri, to you?
First of all, I think again your question has two parts. One is his wife or someone else. Well, from whatever we've seen, Rahulji, we have an interesting situation. We have an interesting situation in which the wife is now beginning to assume a larger political role. And if I may be allowed to say, I had said this several weeks ago, that this is another Rabri Devi ji in the making. She is becoming a new Rabri. Now, whether she sits and first she invites Kalpana Soren ji to her house, to that common abode called the Sheesh Mahal, they gale mile, then wo bhrashtachariyon ke saath gale mile. That is a role that they will have to take the decision. Now, whether it is her or someone else who assumes the role of Chief Minister and what kind of a role they want to play in the political process is not for me to comment. Therefore, your question, would that be acceptable? I'm going to duck that. Because what is acceptable to me may not be acceptable overall.
Okay.
I think people have to make the judgment. But I am very clear. I think they've transgressed, crossed all lines of propriety and political decorum. And I think it's about time that Mr. Kejriwal starts preparing for the trial in right earnest and not politically victimizing it and playing Chief Minister and playing the victim card both together.
Well, the irony certainly won't be lost on lots of people, including those who are AAP voters. Mr. Puri here was a savior, presented himself as an anti-graft savior, and today he's a suspect. Well, we leave it at that, Mr. Puri. Very interesting days ahead for the Union capital. Viewers, very interesting days.